Okay, and now I'm ready for the next step, which is going to be to try to blend in to make this more seamless. So the first thing that I'm going to need to do is in this part of the editing of this face, you're going to see me do several things. And I'm going to just go through them because I will cycle through them while I'm making my edits. So the first thing is that the opacity on the layer is found over here on the right. And I'll be changing that so that I can see through Danny DeVito's face to see what I'm blending with. So in other words, if I want to see where the hair is, I will turn the opacity down on the Danny DeVito layer. So with the correct layer selected, I can see through Danny DeVito. Okay. Some people prefer not to change the opacity, but just check by turning the entire layer off and just looking at it like that. Okay, maybe that's something that you can play around with and see what you prefer. Okay, but I like to turn the opacity down a little bit and kind of look through the face a little bit. Okay, that's one thing. Now, that's called opacity, and this can get confusing because there's something else that's called opacity that will come up when I start talking about the eraser tool. I'm going to use the eraser tool to do my blending here, and let me talk about the important features of the eraser tool that we'll be using today. So the first thing that's important is adjusting the size of the eraser. And this is going to make a difference when let's make this fit on the screen. This is going to make a difference when you're trying to remove material, like you will be from this face. So I'm going to zoom in, okay, because I want to remove a lot of this neck part. So I want the size of the eraser to be, this is a pretty good size, okay? I don't want it too large. I still want some fine control. And then there's this hardness adjustment, which I'm going to turn all the way up to 100%. Because if I'm only interested in removing material and not blending, which is what I'm doing right now in this part, then I want it to have a sharp edge. Let me show you the difference. So here is what it looks like to remove material with a hardness of 100%. It's like a bite was just taken out, okay? And then if I turn the hardness down to something like 7%, see, you can see that the edge is blurred. So for the purpose of removing this material, I want the hardness to be up high because I'm just interested in removing that material. Okay. Then one other setting that I want to talk to you about on the brush is the opacity of the brush. So it's confusing because this is the same word that's being used as the opacity for the layer. But here's the difference. The opacity of the layer just affects what you're seeing, how that layer is displayed on the screen. And the opacity of the brush is like the strength of the eraser function of the eraser. Okay, let me give you an example. So with this hard edge and an opacity of 100%, I get that. But if I turn the opacity down to 21%, I get this. Okay. And then if I click again, I get a little bit more. And if I click again, I get a little bit more, etc. Okay, so you can see that this takes away everything immediately, whereas this gives you some control. If I wanted to blend these together, like maybe like a painter would, I could just click, 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 do a lot of clicking and create a gradual transition. Okay, if I've got the opacity up at 100%, I can't do that. I can't make a gradual transition. Okay, I'm going to undo all of those erasures because that's not what I want necessarily. Okay, so so that's where you're going to hear me talk about the opacity of the brush, and you're going to hear me talk about the opacity of the layer. So I'm going to turn the opacity of the layer down so I can see where Will Ferrell's neck chin is, and I'm going to erase with my brush close to where I can see that line. Okay, it's again, you can keep turning off, or you can adjust the opacity. Okay, now I can see that line better. So that's where his chin is. So I'm just going to erase Danny DeVito's neck up to where the collar begins. Okay. Oops, I don't want to get the hair. I want to leave the hair. Okay. All right, and that's this. So this is one kind of removal where what I'm doing is not really blending, but erasing like content from this image. Okay. It looks like the head is a little bit big still, so I'm gonna use free transform to shrink the head. I think I made it too large here. Okay, that's a little bit better. Yeah, that's good. All right, so now what I'm interested in doing is a different kind of erasing, which is going to be blending. So in this blending, what I'm going to do is use the eraser again to soften this edge just slightly, because right now it doesn't really need to be blended into another color. Well, it does over here on the left, but this the obvious edge of the pixels that the 100% hardness brush left is going to make it look artificial. So I'm going to turn my opacity down on my eraser, and I'm going to soften the edge of my brush. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just slightly scrub the edge of the chin to make that edge look less pixelated. Okay, especially over here. All right. And all I did was just make it a little less of a harsh line. Okay. You'll notice it more when you zoom out. Oops. When you zoom out here. Okay. Now I need to blend over here and in the forehead. So again, with my opacity down and the hardness down, this is going to let me scrub less like a sculptor. Before we were acting a little bit like a sculptor. Now we're acting a little bit more like a painter and blending in some of these things. I'm going to have to decide on whether I want to keep the ear or not. Okay, but you can see that I've blended so that this jaw transition is a little bit more subtle. Okay, and now I'm going to have to do the same thing up here that I did down below. I'm going to start again with a harder edge and remove just the stuff I know for sure I want with an opacity of 100%, and then being able to look through the layer to where the hair ends. And I'm just going to go to the edge of the hair, and I'm going to remove for the parts I know that I want the hair to show through. So I'm going to remove the Danny DeVito head to show the Will Ferrell hair, but not cut down um, into the forehead so much. Okay, so that it's as much as possible leaving Danny DeVito's forehead. Okay, now if I turn the opacity on the layer back up, you can see this really obvious line. Okay, that's telling me two things. One, it's telling me I need to blend, and two, it's telling me that I need to do some more color matching. So let's start with the blending first. So again, when we're blending, we're going to turn the hardness of the brush down, and I'm going to turn the opacity down a little bit. Okay, and this will allow me, if you see what's happening now, this is going to become a lot less obvious, the transition here. Okay, and when the problem is that you have an obvious line, the blending takes care of that. But when the problem is that the color doesn't match, that means you have to go back to your adjustment layers and fiddle with the color a little bit more. Okay, and if it's taking too much away, reduce the opacity of the brush. Okay, you want it to be gradual, so a low opacity to the brush is okay. Okay, now over here we have a dark area, so I'm going to chip away at that a little bit, and that will make it a little bit easier for me to match the colors. Okay. All right, now that we have kind of a gradual transition there, I can decide I probably should get rid of this hair here. I mean, it's probably true that I should get rid of the whole ear as well. So let's get rid of that ear. Okay, Will Ferrell's ear is here, so we're okay with that, with having Will Ferrell's ear. All right, and okay. Again, you can see me, I'm making a lot of changes back and forth to the opacity. That's because, there are different things I'm doing. Sometimes I'm trying to remove material. Sometimes I'm trying to blend. Okay, so now we've got kind of a long version of Danny DeVito's face. And now I can go over on the right and mess with my brightness and contrasts again to see if I can, let's see, hang on a second, to see if I can get it to blend a little bit more. So turning the contrast down seems to be good there. It looks like there's a sweet spot for the brightness as well that makes it more hidden. And I think the colors are fine. Adjusting position maybe. Okay. And that's it. I think if I had gone more slowly on some of those parts, that blending would be less noticeable. But that's the technique. Go ahead and use it to make those transitions as smooth and less noticeable as possible.